This anime begins by introducing a man named Jinzaburo Kuchi, a great general who serves Kamakura. However, due to a mistake he made, Jinza is exiled to the island of Tsushima along with other prisoners. During their journey to Tsushima, a major commotion occurs, which leads the guards to eventually agree to the prisoners' request to be freed from their shackles. Unfortunately, after the shackles are removed, the prisoners turn against the guards and even their fellow prisoners. Despite this, Jinza manages to subdue the rebellious prisoners thanks to his swordsmanship and also succeeds in saving the lives of the remaining prisoners. One of the surviving prisoners, named Animerecaps, reminds Jinza of his reputation as a great pirate across all of Japan. Despite this, Jinza remarks that he has killed too many pirates like Animerecaps. Although they are enemies, under the circumstances of the storm, they cooperate with each other, leading the surviving prisoners to help ensure their ship reaches the island of Tsushima safely. The next morning, the ship is near the island. At that time, Jinza and the other prisoners are greeted by a beautiful woman named Teri, the daughter of the local ruler Tsushima, causing the prisoners' eyes to light up in admiration of the princess's beauty. After entering the island, Jinza and the other prisoners are presented with many delicious dishes, which they eagerly devour. Noticing that Jinza doesn't touch the food, one of the prisoners advises him to eat while he has the chance. Soon after, Teri arrives at the dinner, making the prisoners feel delighted and inviting her to join them. At that moment, Jinza questions Teri about the reason she is treating the prisoners so well. At first, Teri pretends not to understand, but Jinza makes a statement that she cannot deny. As a result, Teri reveals that the prisoners will be used as shields to protect Tsushima from the Makuri, the Japanese term for the Mongol army that is planning to expand. From their conversation, it is revealed that the Mongol army is already stationed in Gappo Bay, with Tsushima as their next target. Therefore, Teri wants the prisoners to fight the Mongol fleet. The prisoners become shocked and angry upon hearing this, especially Chomen, who immediately throws something at Teri. Due to his actions, Chomen is shot with arrows and dies on the spot. Shortly after, Teri collapses in Animerecaps's arms, expressing her anxiety about bearing the responsibility of protecting the island from the Makuri. However, with his support, she does not sink into sorrow. Meanwhile, one of the prisoners, named a Mushi, asks Zhang where the island of Tsushima is located. Zhang, a former wealthy merchant, quickly explains that Tsushima lies between Korea and Hakata. Upon learning that Tsushima is an easy target for the Mongol fleet, Mushi and his comrades grow anxious. Sometime later, news spread that Teri had been kidnapped by an intruder, causing chaos, which the prisoners immediately took advantage of to escape. At the same time, Teri's guard, named Gentaro, quickly ordered his troops to attack the enemy, who was very powerful, as many of his soldiers had already fallen. Unexpectedly, in this tight situation, Jinza arrived to help. Armed with his sword skills, he was able to match the mysterious man using the Gaiki-style sword technique, making them evenly matched. After witnessing Jinza's strength, the mysterious man retreated to the Mongol ship, leaving behind a saddened Teri, who saw that Gentaro and his guards had died to protect her. In that moment, Jinza remarked that he did not expect the person who asked him to protect Tsushima to be so weak. Upon hearing this, Teri stopped her grieving and firmly declared that she would protect Tsushima and its people, before eventually ordering Jinza to help her. Teri's resolve left Jinza silent, prompting Animerecaps to laugh at him for taking orders from a woman. On October 3rd, in the 11th year of the Bun'ei era, the Mongol fleet advanced towards Tsushima. The Mongol Empire was a conquering nation that had taken over much of Eurasia. After their conquests, centuries later, researchers studied Nostradamus' prophecy that said the Mongols would be called Angol-Moaz for producing a world-conquering king. Because of this, the empire had brought calamity to Japan. Not long after, Jinza was summoned by Teri's order to participate in the strategy meeting against the Mongol fleet. However, the meeting did not go as he had hoped, because Tsushika's son believed that the Mongols would not attack Tsushima Island and would go straight to Hakata instead. Hearing such unreasonable talk, Jinza angrily stated that Tsushima Island was the backbone of the Mongol forces to conquer Japan. Therefore, it was impossible for the Mongol fleet to simply bypass Tsushima. Moreover, he was certain that the Mongol fleet would attack Tsushima first. Unexpectedly, Tsusuke felt insulted by this explanation and demanded that Jinza be expelled from the meeting room. Outside, Jinza was immediately scolded by a young boy named Kinpi for sitting in the middle of the road. At that moment, Jinza asked about the condition of Tsushima Island, where a local resident explained that Tsushima Island consists of the upper province and the lower province, with many villages and large bays separating them. Additionally, the island's residents expressed their panic and fear over the Makuri army's expansion into their territory. Not long after, a group of monks suddenly approached Jinza to speak with him. One of the monks, who turned out to be a great shogunate general from Kyushu Island named Shoni Kagetsuke, immediately warned that the Mongol fleet would soon land on Tsushima. Even so, Shon promised to send reinforcements, but before returning to Hakata, he asked Jinza to protect Tsushima Island. Additionally, Shon showed his seriousness by handing over an ancestral sword named Minamoto Yoritamo to Jinza, which was well suited to the Gaiki sword technique. Seeing this, Teri pointed her sword at Jinza, assuming he was trying to escape by ship. Fortunately, Shon quickly cleared up the misunderstanding, explaining that Jinza was merely escorting him. Unexpectedly, Teri didn't want Jinza to leave her side, as she believed he was the only one she trusted to protect her homeland. Teruhi's sudden change in attitude towards Jinza left her servants puzzled. At the same time, Jinza became flustered by the princess's actions. A few days later, on October 5th, bells suddenly rang, signaling that war was imminent. Because of this, Tsusuke immediately began evacuating his people to safety through the forest. Unexpectedly, Teruhi also joined the troops, dressed in armor, and greeted her father, who was already there. Seeing his daughter willing to fight, Tsusuke slapped her right away, not wanting Teruhi to be in danger. As a result, Tsusuke departed with his troops toward the battlefield, leaving Teruhi behind. Not long after, Jinza suddenly leaving the group, heading somewhere. His actions were quickly noticed by Anada Kemeru, who understood what he was going to do and let him go. From atop a hill, Jinza saw the Mongol fleet gathering in Sasa Bay along with thousands of soldiers. Because of this, Jinza immediately offered help to Tsusuke, but his offer was promptly rejected. Tsusuke then expressed his anger at Jinza for the insult during the previous meeting. Even so, he realized that, in his old age, he had to fight the enemy. As a result, Tsusuke asked Jinza to stay in the rear to protect Teruhi, handing him the protective armor that once belonged to the clan's founder, Taira no Tamamori. Soon after, the battle between Tsusuke's troops and the Mongol army began. The Mongol troops were seen showering arrows down on Tsusuke's forces, but they did not falter, especially with Tsusuke, who was nicknamed the God of War from Sasa Bay, leading them. However, the sheer numbers of the Mongol army eventually overwhelmed them. From a distance, Jinza could only watch as the tragic death of the ruler of Tsushima unfolded. As time passed, the battle at Sasa Bay saw the local ruler's forces being outnumbered as the Mongols gained thousands of reinforcements. In the end, Tsusuke and his eldest son perished. Because of this, Tsusuke's adopted son, Abiru Yujiro, ordered the remaining troops to retreat, but Jinza forbade them from fleeing. Frustrated by being commanded by an outsider, Abiru and his troops insulted Jinza, calling him an exile. Without paying much attention to the mockery, Jinza kept fighting until he finally managed to kill the enemy general, causing the enemy forces to fall into disarray. As a result, Jinza immediately called upon Abiru and the troops to return to the battle, leading them forward. To boost their morale, Jinza said that they did not need to follow his words, but rather follow the ancestral emblem they wore. Because of this, the troops began to follow Jinza back into the battlefield. Not long after, Teri also arrived to check on the wounded soldiers, prompting Abiru to urge her to return to the capital. However, Teri also felt responsible and refused to leave her troops behind. That night, the scouts reported that the enemy forces were in disarray due to Jinza having killed the enemy general. Furthermore, Jinza also presented the heads of Tsusuke and her eldest brother, causing Teruhi to collapse in grief but still managed to gather strength to embrace their heads. At that moment, Jinza remarked that bringing home the heads of the ruler and his son had cost many lives, but it was better than seeing the head of the ruler of Tsushima on the enemy's spear. After burying her family, Jinza and the remaining group were seen in a cave. Teruhi, who was also with them, informed the villagers and the troops to return to the capital to regroup, but Jinza refused to return, stating that he intended to strike the enemy while they were asleep. Nevertheless, Teruhi disagreed because the plan was too dangerous, but Jinza ignored her and asked the villagers to guide them. At that moment, a villager named Gucci volunteered, and he insisted on not just being a guide, but also joining the fight because his family had been massacred by the Mongol forces. Moreover, Gucci's friends also volunteered to assist Jinza in the night attack. Seeing their determination, Teruhi eventually joined the mission as well. After reaching the enemy's location, Jinza and his troops observed before launching their attack. Unexpectedly, Gucci and his companions betrayed them by attempting to kill Jinza, but fortunately, Teruhi and her forces quickly realized it. Even so, Teruhi was injured by Gucci's attack while trying to save Jinza. In response, Jinza swiftly stabbed Gucci, who had wounded Teruhi. Afterward, Teruhi was moved to a safe place while Jinza and his troops attacked the enemy. On the other hand, the Mongol general named Hokei was furious with his subordinates for not knowing details about the enemy. At the same time, the Twabara group was monitoring Jinza's movements, as he ordered his troops to attack with different styles. The surprise attack allowed them to defeat their enemies, prompting Abiru to ask why Jinza was willing to risk his life for a victory that was not guaranteed, especially since Jinza was not a native of Tsushima Island. This caused Jinza to recall the past, when he played shogi with a branch family of the Hojo clan named Nago Tokiyaki, who remarked that Jinza greatly resembled his father, even though he did not remember his father's face. At that time, a servant of the shogun from the Hojo clan, Okura Yorisu, immediately warned him not to get too close to Tokiyaki. Not long after, on February 11th, Okura attacked Tokiyaki, prompting Jinza to intervene. Unexpectedly, Tokiyaki's son, Kamatoki, asked Jinza not to interfere. It turned out that Kamatoki had no choice but to let his father be killed in order to preserve the clan. Back in the present, Jinza told Abiru that if he let go of his sword now, something precious to him would be taken away. After saying this, the Mongol army appeared again, carrying weapons that release smoke to confuse and divide their enemies. At first, Jinza and the others were overwhelmed, but they continued to rise and fight against the Mongol forces. Abiru also aided Jinza and his troops, who managed to corner a handful of Mongol soldiers. Additionally, Abiru commanded his men to shoot arrows at the enemy, vowing to protect Jinza and his forces, who were still battling the never-ending waves of Mongol soldiers. Meanwhile, Teruhi and her troops ventured to a location to assassinate the Mongol commander, Orion. From a distance, Teruhi's group finally spotted Orion. Therefore, Teruhi, along with Hidari, immediately shot their arrows. Unexpectedly, Orion's guard was extremely swift, causing their mission to fail. As a result, Teruhi and her group decided to retreat from the area. Amidst the chaos, Orion caught a glimpse of Teruhi's beauty, which mesmerized him. As a result, he quickly ordered his men to capture Teruhi without harming her, intending to present her as a prize. On the other hand, Jinza and his forces encountered another group of Mongol soldiers. At that moment, Abiru was looking for an opportunity to shoot his arrow, unaware that the enemy had firearms. As he stood firmly in position, the enemy soldiers fired at him, striking Abiru. Enraged by this, Jinza's group immediately slashed the enemies with their swords. After slaughtering them all, Jinza had to bid farewell to Abiru, who lost his life from the gunshot wound. Soon after, Teruhi also arrived, and Jinza handed over Abiru's head to be buried. Seeing this, Teruhi could only shed tears, mourning the loss of another family member. Moments later, a Mushi arrived and informed Jinza that one of the Mongol soldiers, part of the Goryeo forces, had landed in Tsushima, specifically to the west. Hearing this, Jinza's forces became pessimistic, feeling hopeless, especially as they were surrounded by enemies. However, Jinza explained that this situation actually worked in their favor because the Mongol Empire had different groups of soldiers. If the Western and Eastern forces met, they would be confused, giving Jinza and his troops a chance to escape through the northern route. After hearing this explanation, Terry ordered her men to follow Jinza's plan. On the other side, the Mongol forces were shocked to discover that Jinza and his troops were no longer in their position, prompting them to send out pursuit forces to find them. Not long after, Jinza's group arrived in the forest and heard Zhang's story that Animerecaps had looted goods from the farmers. Because of this, Terahi and Jinza immediately scolded him, but Animerecaps explained that valuable goods would easily attract the enemy's attention. Therefore, when the Mongol pursuit forces saw him and tried to attack, Animerecaps would finish them off. Hearing this, Jinza reminded Animerecaps not to linger if he didn't want to be surrounded by the enemy. Soon after, the Goryeo forces appeared from a distance, so Animerecaps quickly hurled a large rock at the enemy before fleeing with Zhang. At the same time, the Mongol forces from the west and east had gathered, fighting over the villagers' belongings, which led to bloodshed between them. This incident was promptly reported by Orion's subordinate, who mentioned that the Goryeo forces were fighting with the pursuit forces over the goods. As a result, Orion ordered that the Goryeo forces should not be allowed to take a single penny. That night, Terry buried Abiru's head and then returned to her troops. At that moment, she saw everyone sleeping and approached Jinza, who was asleep, dreaming of Tokiyaki and Abiru. When Jinza woke up, he was startled to find Terry very close to him. Embarrassed, Terry quickly left to wash her face. Not long after, Terry admired the presence of fireflies nearby. At the same time, an old man appeared, approaching Terry and Jinza, inviting them to meet the emperor. Upon reaching the mountaintop, Jinza and the others immediately paid their respects to Emperor Antoku, who introduced herself to Jinza. Antoku then told the story of how, during the Battle of Dan no Yura, a great samurai named Minamoto no Yoritamo had saved her. Because of this, Antoku handed over a katana named Imano Suruga as a token of gratitude to Yoritamo. Back in the present, Antoku noticed that the katana given to Yoritamo was now in his hands, which surprised her, realizing that the sword had protected Jinza all this time. Shortly after, Terry arrived at the hill and also paid her respects. At that moment, Antoku informed Jinza that Terahi was her great-granddaughter, which made her happy. Antoku then handed a gourd bottle containing a letter to Terahi, which was to be delivered to Commander Twabara Nagamine. On the way back, Terahi told Jinza that Antoku's granddaughter had married her father, making her a descendant of the emperor. Because of this, her father often treated her differently, which sometimes made Terahi frustrated. Not long after, Jinza and his troops arrived at Aso Bay and saw a group of women being chased by Mongol soldiers. Because of this, Jinza and his troops immediately hid behind the trees. When Terry asked Jinza to help them, a local from Aso Bay said that they would be fine. Unexpectedly, his words were true, as Twabara's group soon arrived to surround and attack the enemy from both land and sea, wiping out the Mongol forces. After the incident, a monk from Jinza's forces immediately treated the wounded Aso Bay villagers, while Jinza observed the Mongol corpses, which were different from the Western and Eastern soldiers they had encountered before. At the same time, Nagamine also appeared, explaining that these Mongol soldiers were of the Jurchen race. Realizing this, Terry handed the gourd bottle from Antoku to Nagamine. After reading the letter, Nagamine warmly welcomed Jinza and his troops. Additionally, he asked Terahi and the others to accompany him to the Kanataki Palace. Upon arriving, Jinza was mesmerized by the grandeur of the palace gate, and Nagamine informed him that their ancestors had established this building more than 600 years ago. Meanwhile, Amushi was arguing with Sana to showcase his prowess. As a result, the two of them competed around the walls, while Jinza and the others entered the palace area, which was filled with refugees. At that moment, Jinza and his troops were surprised by the skilled artisans and ample weapon supplies there, including equipment for launching stones. During the lunch banquet, the So and Twabara clans were very harmonious. When the So clan praised the greatness of the Kanataki Palace, Jinza said the opposite, that this palace had many vulnerabilities that could be exploited by a large number of enemies for an attack. His statement upset the female troops from Aso Bay, who aimed their weapons at him. Nevertheless, Jinza remained calm. On the other hand, Jinza's companion, named Abasuma, mentioned that he had a silver badge given to him by a Mongol general. After that, Abasuma recounted that he did not want to die foolishly in this area and tried to persuade Seishi to cooperate. Not long after, Jinza said that he would take his members away from Aso Bay, which made the elders question how they would survive without a home and food, especially since they would not be able to endure the winter. It turned out, Jinza had doubts about his decision to leave the palace, but he believed that staying in Kanataki would bring no change. After that, Jinza immediately left the banquet room in frustration. Seeing this, Commander Twabara quickly ordered his members to let him calm down. Jinza then went to a place and was met by Twabara members who protested against his attitude. As a result, Jinza challenged them to a fight and unexpectedly succeeded in knocking them down one by one. As a result of the fight, the local residents became agitated and wanted to help Jinza face Twabara. However, Jinza explained that they were only training as per their agreement, followed by the Twabara group, who each mentioned their names. Soon after, Nagamine came to greet Jinza, which led him to agree to stay in Kanataki and help maintain the defense. Apparently, Nagamine and Jinza agreed to work together against the Mongol forces in Aso Bay. Meanwhile, Abasuma recounted that he obtained the silver badge from a Mongol general after being captured by the villagers. At that time, Abasuma had saved a family and was given the badge as recognition of his skills. However, Seishi regarded him as a traitor. On the other hand, Orion and his subordinates were seen in a meeting discussing the pursuit of the missing Japanese individuals. However, the Mongol leader instead ordered them to focus on the next battle. Additionally, Orion's words brought a breath of fresh air to the Mongol troops due to his spies among the Japanese people. Meanwhile, Abasuma tried to convince Seishi that helping the Mongol army would allow them to regain their status as landowners. Seishi eventually fought back, injuring Abasuma. This incident puzzled a woman from Aso Bay, who wondered why Seishi would kill a fellow citizen, but then supported his actions, explaining that Abasuma was a traitor. Unexpectedly, Seishi intended to take Abasuma's silver plan before ultimately killing the woman. Not long after, Nagamine was seen encouraging the prayers that bad omens had been dispelled and only good news awaited them. Consequently, Nagamine urged the prayer group to continue their prayers at the temple. Shortly thereafter, he went out to meet his subordinates and stated that the fortune was on their side. Shortly after, the scouts assigned by Nagamine were killed by the enemy's deputy commander, preventing them from signaling. Furthermore, the enemy commander ordered his subordinates not to underestimate small matters. Sometime later, Nagamine and his troops saw many torches in the forest, indicating that the Mongol army was near the palace. Therefore, Turhi immediately conveyed a message from Emperor Antoku, asserting that the chance of victory lay in their hands. Simultaneously, Onada Kemaru and Zhang were pleased that reinforcements from Hakata had arrived in Aso Bay, prompting them to decide to leave the battlefield. While preparing for the attack, one of Jinza's comrades asked why he was fighting for Tsushima Island, even though he was not from there. As a result, Jinza explained that during his days in Aso Bay, he learned many things. Moreover, wars are sometimes fought for personal interests, but there is a greater purpose. Jinza's words immediately inspired his troops, causing them to cheer with joy. At the same time, Nagamine, witnessing his fighting spirit and that of his troops, also felt undaunted in facing the Mongol forces. Not long after, Nagamine received news that the Eastern Wall had been attacked and asked Jinza to go there. In addition, Nagamine requested the help of the stone-throwing women to buy time for the women and children to escape first. Hearing this, Tatsu wanted to stay by his side, but he permitted her and promised to catch up. On the eastern side, Jinza arrived just in time to assist Teruhi and her troops. At the same time, the Mongol forces had successfully breached the southern gate after bombing the entrance until it was destroyed. Unfortunately, as a result of this event, Tatsu was killed after being pierced by a wooden stake, which made Nagamine furious and intent on pursuing the enemy. However, With the enemy's numbers overwhelming, he too was eventually struck by a spear. Before taking his last breath, Nagamine stated that he had no regrets about dying in his homeland. Moreover, Nagamine instructed his subordinates not to let the enemy pass over his body. As a result, the troops became motivated to continue fighting against the enemy. On the other hand, Jinza heard news from Amushi that Nagamine had died, while the people of Kanatoki were in flight. Therefore, Jinza and his troops decided to leave Kanatoki immediately, followed by Amushi and Sana, who were also in a hurry to depart. A moment later, Jinza asked Teruhi to be taken away, but she refused, causing his troops to take her by force. After that, a battle ensued between Jinza and the troops against the Mongol forces. In the midst of the fight, Animerecaps unexpectedly returned to assist him against the enemy. Jinza then heard news that Teruhi's escape route was blocked by the enemy. Consequently, Animerecaps urged Jinza to catch up with her and the other troops while he would handle the enemy. With no other choice, Jinza and his troops quickly departed, while Animerecaps continued to fight the enemies he encountered in Sasabe earlier. On the other hand, Hitari was seen asking the monk to join them, but the monk was reluctant to leave the wounded. Unexpectedly, the Mongol troops immediately shot weapons at the monk, prompting Hitari to ambush the shooter with his arrow. Unfortunately, this did not help much as both of them were killed by the enemy. Meanwhile, Teruhi and her troops were being attacked by the Mongol forces and were struggling against the vastly superior enemy soldiers. Fortunately, Jinza soon arrived to help Teruhi and her troops amidst the encirclement of the Mongol forces. Due to this assistance, Teruhi's escape route and that of the others opened up, but the enemy began throwing bombs, causing Jinza to be thrown into the sea. Teruhi, witnessing this, became extremely hysterical. In addition, one by one, Jinza's troops were slaughtered by the enemy forces, while Teruhi felt hopeless for survival, especially after seeing Jinza caught in the explosion. Nonetheless, Jinza's comrade named Kaitani asserted that Jinza must still be alive because he would not die easily. Kaitani also mentioned that Jinza had been thrown into the sea, so there was still hope for his survival. Not long after, Teruhi's assistant, Kano, announced that an escape route had been found, prompting Teruhi and the remaining troops to hurry to flee. On the other side, Amushi and his troops were hiding in the bushes, surrounded on both sides by enemy forces. Therefore, Amushi quickly told Sana that he would place a bomb in the fire, and when the explosion occurred, Sana should escape amid the chaos. Amushi then went to the enemy's location and placed a bomb there. As he was about to run away, he was momentarily blocked by the enemy, although he managed to escape after killing them. Unfortunately, when he was about to jump into the sea, Amushi was struck by a spear, causing him to fall into the water. Seeing this, Sana immediately jumped into the sea to help Amushi, but he had already fallen too deep. Meanwhile, Teruhi and her troops were being driven away by the enemy. To protect Teruhi from the enemy forces, Kaitani was struck by numerous arrows until he died. At that moment, Kano also felt very frustrated, but she had to save Teruhi first. As they ran, both of them fell and slipped. In that moment, Kano choked Teruhi's neck, who said that she wanted to see Jinza once again because he might still be alive. Because of this, Kano stopped her actions, and afterward, Teruhi lost consciousness. From above, the Mongol forces were searching for Teruhi and Kano. Therefore, to ensure Teruhi's safety, Kano quickly distracted the enemy, until she was eventually captured by the Mongol troops. On the other hand, Jinza, still alive, was lost in thoughts of the past when his daughter planted a persimmon tree. Displeased with it, he pulled the tree out. However, his daughter did not give up and planted the tree again. When Jinza was about to uproot it again, his daughter stopped him until they made an agreement, where her daughter promised not to abandon the persimmon tree and would continue to guard it at night. Unexpectedly, at night, an intruder suddenly entered, causing his daughter to scream, until Jinza succeeded in defeating the intruder. At that moment, Jinza explained to his daughter the reason for not allowing the tree to be in their residence, as the enemy would hide in the tree. After that, Jinza told his daughter to rest. Apparently, the tree was left alone by Jinza. Over time, the persimmon tree grew taller because it was well taken care of by his daughter. Not long after, Jinza finally awakened from his dream and tried to swim to the surface, aided by a fish to reach the land. Upon entering the forest, Jinza saw the bodies of his friends and sat on a tree trunk. At that moment, Shiraishi suddenly appeared and wanted to take revenge by killing Jinza. Unexpectedly, Jinza managed to grab his sword, saying that he would teach him how to use a sword. Therefore, Jinza immediately invited Shiraishi to follow him. Some time later, after training, Shiraishi was seen saving children, while Jinza encountered the Mongol general who had previously fought him in Sasabe. It turned out that the general was from the Jurchen race, named Lu. At that time, Lu quickly threw Onita Kemeru's sword and explained how he had killed him. Because of this, Jinza, filled with rage, began to fight Lu, resulting in an intense battle between the two. As Lu was cornered, Jinza fearlessly stepped closer to Lu, causing all of his troops to part for him. Upon reaching Lu, Jinza immediately stated that he fought not for anyone else, but for himself. After that, Jinza left Lu and his troops behind. On the other hand, an officer from the Mongol troops announced that they would leave the war on Tsushima Island and move to Kyushu. However, the commanders believed that if there were many people like Jinza in Kyushu, the Mongol forces would become pessimistic. Meanwhile, Terry finally regained consciousness and realized how Kano had covered her with leaves to conceal her presence from the enemy. Terry then quickly navigated through the forest and reunited with Jinza. At that moment, they greeted each other, prompting Jinza to say that as long as they were alive, the chance of winning would remain wide open. Not long after, Shiraishi and other survivors also appeared. At that time, they firmly told Jinza that the war in Tsushima was not over yet, and the story finally ended here. Moral lesson from the story: even when you're fighting a giant army, remember that a fish can be a better swimmer than you, and a tree can hold on to a secret better than your best friend. So, if you can't swim, maybe just climb a persimmon tree and hope for the best.